You think this would have given us a better result if we had more masks, quicker masks?
Possibly.
Serious?
Possibly, yes.
I have family members who now have heart conditions as a result of the vaccine. This is something that not only medical professionals widely now acknowledge, but are also our own federal government through the National COVID Vaccine Injury Scheme claim. I'd like to know how the Labor Party reconciles its position regarding the effects of the vaccine in light of the Premier's divisive victory speech.
It's always a balance in terms of individual rights versus community protection. And that's the way I looked at it, to be blunt, in terms of aged care and disability. And, for argument's sake, we don't allow pedophiles to do whatever they want to do. It is always... I'm just talking...
Luke, that was not the thing.
No.
All right,
No. In terms of... We have limitations in terms of sexual behaviour in the community deliberately because we live in a community because we expect certain behaviour.
Right.
There is always a balance in terms of the way you drive on the road. We have restrictions on that versus the way you don't. So it's always a balance.
If your first response when you're talking about mandates is pedophiles, that's a problem.
Why do you believe that people continue to support Daniel Andrews, given the unprecedented number of well-founded allegations of corruption against not only Daniel Andrews, but also the Victorian Labor Party?
Well, I'm not sure they're well-funded necessarily, so I wouldn't agree with that statement per se, because his capacity to reach in and understand the community.
Victoria, we live in a state with a level of corruption that vastly surpasses that of the period under Bjelke Petersen in Queensland.
Big words.
This is systemic and serious corruption at every level through all of the major institutions, including significant parts of the justice institutions.
They're called the Zeros because they're the COVID zero fanatics. So they're the ones that basically took what was said during the lockdowns where we need to get to zero, we need to eliminate it, a completely unscientific and insane concept that was purely statistically impossible but was pushed for months. They absorbed this as a personality trait and have never been able to let it go.
Need an amnesty then. Angry at me now.
Yeah.
And we end up with the boomers who own property wanting to protect the property market, and the millennials who want it to crash. Frankly, I want it to crash so I can buy in.
There's all of that. But how did we get there?
Howard, but yeah.
Oh, well, no, I'm not. Mate, I'm always happy to have a dig at Liberals, but that, to be fair...
Welcome everybody to an episode of Better Than Q&A. This is I think it's our third, I'm not sure. But today we are exploring the topic of the future of Australian politics, and we are joined by an excellent panel. Before we do that, I'm going to do some advertisements while I've got your attention. To support Discernible, we exist because a very few people support us at discernible.locals.com. All of this stuff is free because of people there supporting us. Everyone in the room today, thank you for being here, buying tickets to support this little show. And of course, we have, you take a look for the rest of the show, my awesome watch. We have created these based on Tag Heuer watches, which are about $4,000. Ours are a quarter of that. You can buy these online, links are in the description below. People here today can buy them for cash much cheaper. All right, welcome. Thank you for being here, panelists. Let me introduce you. Who are you?
I always like when you make up my introductions. I was waiting for something like big and strange. You always come up with something good.
Do you remember the time I did the Nazi introduction at QandA?
Yes, I have never forgotten that. Yes, that was what I was going with.
No, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. When are you bringing back your podcast?
From next week, actually. We're going to be doing
you
one.
haven't told me.
Well, no, the interview style ones. If you want to come back, we can do it, but you told me no.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you for coming. This is Emily from Voice for Victoria. This is Ken Phillips, Self-Employed Australia.
And Marxist student.
Marxist student.
Yes.
Is this... Okay, so Ken recently went to the Marxism conference, if you've seen an episode of the People's Project, and he loved it.
It was just fabulous. It was COVID safe. You couldn't see anyone's face because everyone had a mask on.
Tightly wound, N95.
But you know, you could meet people at coffee outside afterwards when it was cold and take your mask off and actually see their face. It was rather good. I've got to say they were impressive, exceedingly well organised, 1,300 people, I can attest. There was easily 1,300 people there. And the only thing I couldn't stomach was at the very, very end when they filled up one of the largest auditoriums at Melbourne University and all decided at the very end to sing the Internationale.
Yeah, well, that's the Fitzroy football
Is it? Yeah, so if you don't know the Internationale, it's the national song for communists. And they all stood up and robustly got in, and I thought, no, I'm going. So if you follow my Substack or my Substack thing, I've got a link to the Internationale on there, and you can read it. So the Internationale came about after the 1917 revolution in Russia, you see. So it holds all the Marxists together.
So you're a Stalinist or a Maoist?
I'm not sure if I'm a Marxist-Stalinist or a Stalinist-Marxist. I can't quite work it out, you see.
That's all right.
Just grab a mic there, Luke. A special guest. Thank you, Luke Donnellan, who's appeared on our show to be interviewed, a minister with Daniel Andrews' government from 2000.
Former.
Sorry.
Former.
I was about to use dates, which would have indicated.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I've stuffed up this slide, everyone.
Don't worry about me pretending I'm still a member when I'm not.
No, you're not. Okay, so but you were minister in the Daniel Andrews government from 2002 to 2019, 20?
18. To 2022.
22.
I was in government.
So you're like 20 years you were a government, and you're a minister for a lot of that.
Fair bit.
Yeah, so
Enough.
Yeah, use your microphone so that
sorry.
people can, yeah. So it'd be good to get your perspective because you've met the man that everyone wants to know about. There's an enigma about him. Those who love him and those who hate him. I don't think we know the real Daniel. Is that fair to say?
Look, as you're saying, there's those who love him and those who hate him. But I will say, in terms of a campaigner, there are very few who are as skilled in terms of understanding and reaching in and campaigning like that individual. Full stop. You could go around the country, you could look at the last 30 years, very few are as skilled as he is in that space.
But my question is, how much do we see the real Daniel?
Well, I think the real Daniel is that.
You think what we see is what we get? Because what I see I don't like. So is that fair?
Yeah, well, that's fine. But I'm just saying that's the real Daniel. And the only bit you wouldn't see is golf.
Oh, he's a golfer?
Yeah.
No, we also don't see his
Fanatical
drinking habit.
golfer.
Okay, so
Fanatical, yeah.
let's get started with some questions. We have live questions today. This is how we want to run it. People will be coming up and asking the questions. The first one is Sean. Should I not be using full names on this show? Whoops, might have to edit that. Sean is here to ask a question. So come up onto this X, everyone, and we'll give you a microphone. Can I borrow your microphone? And we'll keep it with you down there. When you're finished, just leave it on the.
Good afternoon. My name's Sean. Luke, this question is specifically for you, but first I'd like to say thank you very much for coming. It must be very hard to come into the Lions Den, and I very much do appreciate that you come. So my question is, what is the Achilles heel of Dan Andrews, and how do we exploit it?
Into the microphone, Luke.
Sorry. I think in current circumstances, obviously debt's going to be an issue. But as I was talking a little bit earlier, it's really the issue is in many ways the conservative part of the community in terms of the political class just hasn't upgraded and lifted their skills over the years. To be blunt, when I first ran in my seat, I knocked on 80% of doors before I even became the member. So I took off 6 months and every afternoon I went door knocking. And guess what? It gave me an invaluable way of understanding the community because they'd tell you face to face because I'd never door knock to say, oh, here I'm Labor, here I'm, I want to sell you something. I'd just go shut up, Luke. Sorry. I'd literally just go to the front door and say, look, I'm here to talk to you. What are the issues? You tell me. I'm not going to do it. I'm not here on a political spiel. So that was an invaluable way of picking up the feel of the community, or at least getting a sense of their issues, sharing their lives and things like that. Now the Labor Party has sort of, in a sense, in many ways, put that into a structure and so forth. But it is really the capacity to go to the front door and engage with people on an individual basis and actually get an understanding of what their issues are, that the left side of politics is doing so much better than the Conservative side. I tend to think that for some reason, Liberal Party head office, which was, for argument's sake, capable until maybe 20 years ago, has very much lost that capacity. And that then affects all, I guess, across the board, the capacity of having the National Party might be reasonable, but they're never going to win a majority. So the problem is, what is the Achilles heel? The Achilles heel is the capacity of the Conservative parties to actually garner votes, to have that direct engagement. And the Achilles heel, in a sense, might be the debt issue. To be blunt, I think that's going to be a hard task to get on top of.
Even though it's directed at someone else, or we just all answer? Yeah. Okay, great. Just checking. I thought that was a really interesting response, given particularly the systems that you're talking about, which Labor does very, very well. The Liberal Party do it as well, so they put a lot of effort and time into door knocking all the communities as well. I think, as far as an Achilles heel is concerned, one of the reasons the Labor Party has gotten to where it is the complete lack of opposition. No one here is going to be surprised to hear me say that. And a lot of it is that communication. So I would say, what Luke just said, where Labor goes door to door and talks to the community, they're then effective at turning that into messaging. And the Liberal Party will do the same thing, but it's the effectiveness of the messaging. And that I think is the real gap between them, because I've spoken to people, particularly with the 2022 election, who were both involved in campaigning and the door knocking, and even residents messaging me about, this person came to my door, this is what they said, this is the tech they had with them, this is all those sorts of things. And there is obviously a gap there. And I would also agree with the assertion that a lot of it has to do with their head office. Over time, there just seems to be a lack of captain driving what it is that they stand for as well. So this is one of the things that, I spoke about very publicly in the lead up to the election a long, long time beforehand. Even as someone excessively involved in politics, being able to say to the Liberal Party, which I said to their face, I don't know why I would vote for you. Like, I'm your problem demographic. I'm a young female. I don't understand. I am unhappy with the current behaviour and performance of the government, but I don't understand why I would vote for you just because you're the other guy. That's not necessarily enough for most people. As far as an Achilles heel, I think it is one of those things. The debt would be very close to being that, as well as simply the tenure. There was a piece in, I believe it was The Australian, about Dan becoming victim to that third term poison chalice. He's sort of in that death spiral at the moment. The mismanagement is starting to catch up with him. Many IBAC are starting to catch up with him. From a personal perspective, the Achilles heel is definitely criticism, quite a glass jaw, and this is where you can start to see him getting very upset in question time, and that kind of behaviour. And this is where, if you wanted more of a personal exploitation of an Achilles heel, it would be basically make fun of him. Like, that's the one thing he can't stand, to be made fun of. Or anyone who sort of has those personality traits, he is very much kind of what you see is what you get. And being a control freak, he's very, rigid in that respect. And so being made fun of in that respect is not something he takes very well.
Can I just confirm this with Luke? Because you gave some reasons why he might be able to be defeated, but on the personal level, like this glass jaw thing I've heard a lot, are there any personal Achilles heels that he's good at many things, but what are his weaknesses as a politician that he's not strong on?
I'm just trying to think. Look, I've never seen a better communicator in my life. And I know people will say, I don't like him. That's fine. But his capacity to find the right words when he's at a conference is, I've never seen anything like it. And I've sat beside many capable politicians on all sides of the House. Well, not sat beside, but, been in their presence and listened and so forth. I don't. Yeah, look, this is his passion, this is his life. Politics is his whole
He must have a weakness.
Well, we've all got weaknesses, but you don't...
So what's his?
Well, I don't know. I don't share my weaknesses. I'm sorry, but, right, you don't go around telling the guy who wants to, or the female who wants to run against you, whatever the case may be, these are my bloody weaknesses.
Yeah.
You keep them secret. They're in a little box.
Did anyone, so have you seen my interview with John Pizzuto, everyone? So I asked him this very question. I said, look, like what Emily said, I tell me why I should vote for you, because I don't understand why. Were you convinced with his answer at all? Was he better than Matthew Guy or just as bad? No, same. No. The full interview's up. It's only 30 minutes. He only gave me 30 minutes.
I think the difference
Microphone.
for many years is the Liberal Party never has focused on Parliament and the creation of chaos that Parliament that Daniel did on TED.
The people,
sorry.
The people
in
on the
a
recording.
sense, he created absolute chaos in Parliament. He walked out. He made it
Daniel?
difficult for TED to function. The Liberals have never used Parliament like public accounts and estimates to embarrass the government. Well,
Haven't they tried to? Limerick has been pushing in there. Newbury was pushing in there.
yeah, but that's Limerick, but it's, by himself.
Newbury and Reardon went hard in PAC as well.
Yeah, but the whole lot have to do it at once.
So they need to be more aggro, the opposition.
Well, it doesn't need to be aggro. It needs to be better targeted and better skilled and better focused and do the research before you actually, ask the questions.
Okay.
So I'm once again going to agree with Luke on this. What should be happening is there should be strategies going in where you already know where the problems are and you make a game plan going in to go, this is where we can see the problems are, this is what we're going to do to them while we're in there. And you actually have an end strategy with comments, lines, a strategy ready to go. So, for example, if you know that there's a hole in the budget where there's been expenditure where there shouldn't have been, you would have... how you're going to frame your question in PAYAC in a way that your lines will then be communicated to the media later that night, in a way that you can then follow up and pursue in an entire campaign. That is something that the Labor Party have an intrinsic understanding of how to do. They've done very well at it, and it is entirely absent from what I have seen generally in the Liberal Party, except for the odd individual where you get them making extremely valid points. But that is it. You will get, that's a good point, and there is nothing behind it to then push it into the public eye. There is nothing then behind it as a strategy about how they then double down on that criticism and push it forward into something that makes them offer a solution. That is also a step that they tend to miss.
A related question. Let's go to Bridget's question. If you could get ready to ask your question, Bridget. But yes, just more on this idea of Daniel's capabilities. Sorry for the viewers who are watching that are not in Victoria, but we are witnessing a masterful politician, I think, in Victoria. So when you're ready, Bridget, please ask your question.
So my question is to Luke also. Why do you believe that people continue to support Daniel Andrews, given the unprecedented number of well-founded allegations of corruption against not only Daniel Andrews, but also the Victorian Labor Party?
Well, I'm not sure they're well-funded necessarily, so I wouldn't agree with that statement per se, because his capacity to reach in and understand the community. To be blunt, there were suggestions, this, that and the other before the last election, and people still voted for him. So that is his training, that is his skill, the capacity to communicate. This is a person who never went into ministerial offices and took high-paid jobs, sat in electorate offices, sat behind folding machines, literally sent out letters and tested and trialled and did all that work you need to do to understand what works and what doesn't. And this is the legacy of that, the training of being on the ground, not getting lost in, a high-paid job and working in a minister's office and not really engaging with the people on the ground. And that's why he keeps winning, to be blunt. And that's why I sort of was saying a little bit earlier that the Conservative side needs to get its... it needs to improve its performance, and it really is about understanding how to do that. In the Labor Party, we've got people like Cos Samaras, Stephen Donnellan, who just specialise in campaigning and nothing else. And they literally will go from one campaign to another, both from state to state and overseas, literally taking the skills they've learned from campaigning here internationally. I think Stephen Donnellan does work in Scotland, America, places like that, and it's very much taken off the Obama style of going to the front door and building activists within the local community. And it's just something that we've got on top of. But, I spent my young years thinking the Labor would never win. So, I went through the golden years of the Liberal Party in all the East. I mean, the idea that the Labor Party has seats in the east, or even the Kooyong, where I grew up, is teal now, is, well, I can assure you, when I was at primary school, I would never have, you know what I mean, never have seen that coming. So, yeah, it's the skill base. And, yeah, people might be angry and get grumpy and say it's not fair, but the problem is it's fine to have that, but really what's the action that needs to happen is really to skill up.
I would both agree and disagree with some of what you've said. As far as well-founded allegations, I would say they are well-founded. If our IBAC looked like New South Wales, he'd be gone a long time ago.
Yeah, but not because of IBAC, because the Liberals fold really easily when there's a scandal.
So when it comes to why do people continue to support Daniel Andrews, particularly with the corruption, and I've said this a million times, but I'll say it again, people didn't feel safe going to the Liberal Party during the election. Like, it's not that they liked him. There's a lot of political ignorance out there. There was a lot of people who weren't necessarily aware of the extent of some of the allegations and some of the things that had happened. And that's a communication problem, predominantly from the opposition, again. But then they also didn't make themselves appear as a viable alternative. And we, as voters in Australia in general, have a tendency that if we're not sure, we'll stick with what we know. Like, that's a really, I think that most of the panel would agree that, generally speaking, Australian voters are like, we don't really like either of you. Do we want to risk the one that we don't know, though? And it is worth noting, however, the Labor primary does continue to drop. This is not something where they are wildly popular. Any narrative of that respect, whether federal or state, is not necessarily correct. The support for both major parties continues to decline, so it's also not just them. But Labor certainly outstrip in preferences. And there's a lot more left-leaning parties. So it goes back to Luke's point again that it's not just Labor who are taking out this vote. A lot of the Greens all goes to Labor. A lot of the Teals all goes to Labor. A lot of these more progressive parties, because they are organised, they are well communicated, they get themselves funding and they get themselves organised and they flow their preferences. The opposite side of politics, the more conservative side, I mean, anyone who knew anything about what happened in that 2022 election, it was basically like they turned on each other and the left would have just sat there laughing their ass off going, well,
they still are right now.
Yeah, they still are right now.
What's going on?
And there's a variety of reasons for that, I'll go into that later, but I think this idea that people continue to support the government, it was not actually really reflected. Like, their primary dropped. I don't necessarily would do that. There is a lot of rusted on voters in this country, compulsory voting. By that point, we'd already had an election that year. They were pretty over it. So, which I get, particularly after the last couple of years, there was a lot of political fatigue. So I wouldn't kind of necessarily put it like that, but I think that the budget catastrophe and people kind of clicking, oh, hey, who we vote for impacts our lives.
It doesn't automatically mean you go back to Liberal, though, this time. That's different.
No. And this is the problem. You're just going to get a bigger disaffected middle as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. So, well, let's test the audience. If you had a choice, who would you vote for? Would you hold your nose and vote for a mainstream that you don't particularly like, Liberal or Labor, say with a budget crisis? Or would you roll the dice? Would you have someone, this would never happen, but would you put a Clive Palmer or a Pauline Hanson or a socialist, some outside independent as premier for a season like they do in Europe and
Why
see how they go?
Why did you pick them as the examples?
Just into smaller parties that would never get in, or a
but
Limerick.
Just pick someone who's not perhaps quite so extreme in some of their policies.
Well, Limerick? Yeah, so just small independent party. Would anyone feel confident to give a premiership, roll the dice and give the premiership to an untested smaller party for a term? So for the people at home, yes, we've got most of the room saying, yeah, we'll roll the dice for a term and see. I would.
The issue is they're not going to have a majority, so how do you get there?
Yeah, it was a hypothetical question. I'm just testing whether people are ready to have that risk. Because if they're ready to have that risk, perhaps someone in the majors could rise up and do something a bit more radical and say, we're going to do this, either left or right, and then take... I think we're over the mainstream Labor versus Lib financials.
You think that that's going to happen, Matt? Someone's going to rise up?
Well, we had a Trumpian moment in the US. So, Ken, you are suspiciously quiet on the Daniel Andrews question.
He talks enough other times.
That's right.
In Victoria, we live in a state with a level of corruption that vastly surpasses that of the period under Bjelke-Petersen in Queensland.
Big words.
This is systemic and serious corruption at every level through all of the major institutions, including significant parts of the justice institutions. So Dan Andrews has several qualities. If you're wanting to look for his potential downfall, it's the same downfall that every really successful politician has, and it's called their ego and the God complex. And it invariably gets most of them eventually, and they bring themselves down, and they don't know when to go. So whether or not Dan's got the capacity to know when to go, we'll see. But Dan is obviously a stunning communicator, absolutely stunning, but he's completely ruthless. There is no one or no thing or no institution that he will not destroy or throw under a bus for the purposes of retaining power. And there's a long history of that. The Liberal Party, I said this to a lawyer a little while ago, you know, you're playing by Queensberry's rules.
What's that?
And they said, what's Queensberry's rules, right? Queensberry's rules is it, you go back to the olden days where they'd have a duel with the guns, right? And you go out and you'd walk, you know, you'd both walk 10 paces that
Would
way.
you? Is that what you do?
Right.
Yeah.
And then you turn and gentlemen would only fire, you know, 1, 2, 3, fire,
Yeah.
right? That was Queensberry's rules.
Fire on two.
Right?
Yeah.
Someone who didn't play by Queensberry's rules, they'd walk in 10 paces, turn around and go bang before the count was done, right?
Yeah.
So so I'll tell you, the strategy of the Liberal Party at the last state election was to allow others to do the damage branding of Dan and to try and come through the middle as the good-looking people.
Yeah.
And politics is about both presenting solutions and being firm about where you're going, and certainly Dan knows what he wants, right? So you know where you get what you get with Dan. But you also have to be ruthless. So you have to be prepared to destroy people. This is just the you know. Read Shakespeare. Human nature doesn't change. So the art of politics is to both present and be good and have a vision, but it's also to destroy. And that's the unfortunate nature of us as humans. So what's happening with the Liberal Party at the moment with the Deming issue and so forth, and forget about even the personalities and who you agree with or disagree with, right? But the Liberal Party in Victoria has to have a vicious blooding, because without a vicious blooding, whoever wins, right, whoever wins, but without that vicious blooding, it cannot establish where it's going and what it stands for and why it's there, because out of vicious blooding, strong people come who have a vision and have leadership and move forward. John Pesciuto set up the time in which he was going to have a blooding, set up the circumstances, and then backed off in a situation in which he had established this was going to be the time we'll have the blooding. Now, whether he can recover from that or not, I've no idea. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to ask Ken, and Luke, I'd be interested as well. With what you were saying, I agree entirely, which is unsurprising. But do you think Pesciuto is capable of that now?
I did a lot of work with John when he was an advisor at some stage where there were issues of common policy, and I found him very, very good to work with as a policy advisor. You have to remember, becoming the leader of a party, and particularly in opposition, there's a really horrendous learning curve. And no leader has gone through becoming a leader of a political party. And you look at anyone who's become Prime Minister, and I've got to say, or leader of a Premier, and Albanese is quite unusual. There's usually some stumbling.
He hasn't stumbled, it seems.
There's no stumbling out of him at this stage, but it's normal for terrible stumbling. So whether or not this is John's learning process and that he comes out of it, well, we'll have to see. So I don't know. I don't know him well enough. But there's the process, and I hate the word Conservative Party because I think it's a term that's very weird, right? Because who knows what Conservative is.
Radicals?
Radicals.
Oh, the nice people, maybe the nice people, the nice party, the nice party.
Everyone should know that these two gentlemen here who have quite different views on corruption and Daniel Andrews are very close friends. Can you believe? Very, very close friends for decades. I'd like to know how that dynamic works. But the question is, Sean, you're saying you wanted to hear Luke more on which issue? On the bloodletting of the Liberal Party. Okay.
What is his... So as somebody who's worked against or
Yeah.
worked on the other side of the fence,
Yeah.
who's hearing this said about the Liberal Party,
Yeah.
what's your perspective on that? Is that what actually needs to come from the Liberal Party?
Bloodletting and renewal.
Look, some general comments. Every time we have a situation whereby, say, Labor is in the States and then federally the whole world's going to fall apart and the Liberal Party's never going to recover. I've been through that on the Labor side where Liberals had every virtually state government and federal and everyone goes, Labor's gone. And I feel like saying, well, yeah, sure, our primaries on both sides are reducing. That is just, to be blunt, the community getting frustrated with the majors, and that's understandable and acceptable. But to be blunt, I don't think, by any stretch of the imagination, just because the Liberals are in this situation today, that it won't improve over time. I do think they will probably have a very good chance of winning the next Queensland election, or the Liberal National Party up there. I think the Labor Party up there has been it's multiple reasons, I think, but one of it is long time. Two, aren't probably performing as well as they need to. But in terms of the state, my perception of John Pizzuto, because I was used to argue with him a lot across the House, and I got on well, we just used to argue, but he does have a focus on Parliament, which is where the Liberal Party does need to focus in terms of using Parliament as a tool, and they never have. Generally, when I've been before PAYAC, in other words, they're asking me questions about my portfolio and so forth, I don't think I've ever had a question that couldn't just be answered quite straightforward. So a lot more work needs to go into it. So I tend to think that John does have a focus on that, and I think that should assist him in terms of, and I'm not into this, but causing trouble for the Labor Party, obviously.
Luke?
It's not really for me to... but that's better.
Hey, Luke,
I can't really do much more on that front.
Keep your mic ready. I want to ask you a question. So, of all the potential contenders, so there's Brad Batten, there was, from brief moment, there was Ryan Smith, there was Matthew Guy, Michael O'Brien, now John Pizzuto. Who would give Labor the most trouble if they led the Liberal Party?
I think John's a good choice, and I get on very well with Brad Batten because he shared a boundary with me. So we appeared on 3AW on the election night together. So I get on quite well with Brad.
You dogged us for that. Thank you.
What's that?
You dogged us to go on 3AW.
Okay. Well, no, but Neil had asked me many times before that, and I wouldn't leave my community because they'd done all the work.
No, I still love you. No, but
that's why I finally said yes to Neil and gave you the dog.
Who would be a bigger threat, though? You think John Pizzuto is the biggest threat the Liberal Party's got?
I think so.
Really? He doesn't seem that strong. He said one thing to me 2 weeks ago, and then he went out of media and said something else. He seems to not be conviction.
I don't know well enough to, you know what I mean? But to me,
John.
he seems a very capable performer in the Parliament.
Yeah.
And that is one area the Liberal Party has not been good for many, many years. And it is a valuable tool to get back into government. People just think, it's just Parliament, no one's watching Parliament. Well, to be blunt, Andrews created merry hell for Ted every day of the week in question time.
Tony Abbott style.
And guess what? Then Ted's people started questioning Ted and whether he was up to it and all that.
Okay.
The Parliament is the forum because it's the sanest way of dealing with the arguments we have in the community of what we should do. And everyone will say, they all get angry and scream and rant. Well, I want them to.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want them sitting there. I don't want anyone sitting here going to Parliament and not being passionate about what they do. It doesn't matter what side of the house you're on. And if people yell and scream and rant and rave, well, that's a lot better than going and giving each other a snot in the nose.
What about Luke Mins and Perrottet? They had a very cordial, civil, polite campaign.
Well, that's them, but I like the fact that people are passionate about, it doesn't matter what side of politics you come from, I just want people who are passionate.
Yeah, okay.
Because it's important that we have people who are passionate about democracy and outcomes, whether they think the democracy is perfect or not, it's important.
Can you just pass that spare microphone down for me, Luke? There's another one there. We'll let you guys show, and Emily wants to talk more, so we'll give her one.
I was just going to say that in terms of the policy and the Parliament, completely agree. I think the question will be, and this goes back to what Ken said as well, being a leader is not just about policy. I mean, it's the party room as well, and it's the ability for people to look at you and listen to you and want to follow you and to see something of a future in what it is that you are saying. And I think that, your reaction to your own interview with Pseudo and the current absolute chaos internally with deeming and things like that, there is absolutely no question that the entire deeming situation is rampant mismanagement. That they have done it so badly at every step, as far as I'm concerned. But that is part of being a leader. That is part of managing the individuals in your party that don't necessarily get along, that you have a difficult situation. How do you keep people together? How do you stop explosive reactions? All those sorts of things. And that, I think, that needs to almost be managed before he can focus on Parliament. I think that's the lesson he's had to learn the hard way. Whether or not he will learn it remains to be seen. But I can tell you right now, Newbury did them absolutely no favours.
What the hell was that?
That was one of the single dumbest political things I reckon I've ever seen in my entire life.
What did he say, for everyone who hasn't seen it?
So for those who don't know, both he and Matthew Guy appear to have had a clever idea in the back of their heads to turn up at Parliament yesterday or the day before, losing track of days, and say that there were terrorists in their own party. So, of course, the first thing Labor did, and I would have done it too, is turn around and say, the party are terrorists.
So that was Matthew Guy and James Newbury did that?
Yeah, so one of them did it first and then the other one doubled down. Not entirely sure of the exact chronological time order, but clearly if both the words coming out of their mouth have had some clever idea to either conjoin or they decided to agree with each other. And I was like, well done. That's fucking free kick. Well done. What a stupid thing to say.
Let's go to a related question from one of the Beckers. Here we go. Hang on. Let's go to... Sarah. Sarah, would you like to come and ask your question? It's for you, Emily, to do with Twitter and this what we've been talking about, a bit of aggro between both sides. So thank you, Sarah. There's a microphone there.
Has Emily seen any easing in the hostilities on Twitter between the two sides since the easing of the restrictions and the mandates? And where does she stand on holding people accountable versus forgiving them?
This is it. Can I also add a bit for that? Thank you, Sarah. So Cos Samaras I interviewed, right? And I've been publicly praising him because as a person in studio, he was amazing. But I do see on Twitter he's a bit of a bastard too.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I said to him, mate, calm down on Twitter, because in real life he's a gentleman. He's a love. I really like him, and he's honest. He's authentic. But then on Twitter he's something else.
Yeah, look, it's. I think it's a little bit easier when you're behind a screen, and this is something I'm quite strong in a lot of my commentary. And so I'll go to the question first, and then I'll make some other comments. But in terms of the easing of hostilities between the two sides, I would say yes, obviously, given it is not a current topical issue in terms of a lot of the mandates and restrictions. You do find that when more and more news comes out about them easing the mandates and doing all those sorts of things, you don't really get very many people in the comments anymore saying, why are we doing this? This is terrible. We should keep them on. That sort of faction that was kind of cheering for them has really been reduced to what is nicknamed on Twitter the Zeros. So they're called the Zeros. They're called the Zeros because they're the COVID zero fanatics. So they're the ones that basically took what was said during the lockdowns where we need to get to zero, we need to eliminate it, a completely unscientific and insane concept that was purely statistically impossible but was pushed for months. They absorbed this as a personality trait and have never been able to let it go. And so they're about all you kind of see in the comments, and there's sort of like a colloquial term on Twitter calling them zeros, and that those are the only ones that complain. And then you've got the opposite side of people who are very frustrated, who either vehemently disagreed with the restrictions and the mandates or were affected by them and/or...
Cookers is what they're called, right?
No. There's a lot of very
That's
moderate...
what PR guy calls everyone on that side.
Yeah, well, I mean, how strong is your intellect if that's what you got? They get very frustrated and they actually tend to be the ones sharing and engaging a lot more, going, see, told you so. A lot of them feeling very celebratory if they were able to hold out. A lot of people still talking about the fact that, nurses still can't work, all those sorts of things. Where do I stand on holding people accountable versus forgiveness? I think forgiveness comes in when it comes to perhaps individuals that took the word of authorities that they now look back on and realise that perhaps they got lied to or misled, or there was an element where they kind of go, wait a minute, if you knew this at the time, why were you telling me that? Because that was what informed their behaviour. I think it's very difficult if you have someone who says, I believed this, but I don't anymore. Do you still feel the same way about them? If they've changed their minds, the question is, do you change yours? As far as accountability is concerned, I sincerely hope there will be a reckoning of some kind and it will come out eventually, and I truly believe there are enough people passionate that it will, to bring the truth out about what really happened, about how and why a lot of the decisions were made. A lot of them were political. One of the reasons I had many of the opinions that I did at the time was I knew a lot of things that were happening internally that even now I haven't spoken about publicly. I had hoped that, we might have a royal commission, but that hasn't quite worked out. And whilst it seems unlikely that full accountability will happen, because it rarely ever does, I do think that long term, and I do hope that there is some level of historical record that the decisions made, some of the statements made, and the general kind of mannerism in which everything happened over the last few years was absolutely not the way to do it. And I think as long as we as a society can look back and go, these are some of the main points that really we should never, ever, ever repeat, that I think is probably going to be one of the most important things, and I would do everything I can to support that happening.
We need an amnesty then. Angry at me now.
Yeah.
You are watching Better Than Q&A on Discernible, and one of the reasons we made this USB time capsule is because everyone's calling for an amnesty, and we want to put on record a bunch of evergreen conversations with people like Stanford's Jay Bhattacharya to say, no, there were people calling this out from the beginning. You cannot lie to us now. So get that at our website, teamhuman.au. I'm getting really good at inserting ads every 5 seconds. I've been practicing. Can we go to another question? I want to get onto this this idea of it's another one from, I won't say the last name, but can you, Joanne, are you ready to ask your question? This idea of Glenn Drury in elections. We've actually had Glenn Drury on we had him on federal election coverage.
Yeah, we had him join as a guest.
Yeah, you were there. Yeah.
Yeah, so Drury is an interesting character. I have had the opportunity to, through the time when I was working with the Lib Dems for a very brief period of time, get to meet and speak to him quite a number of times. And the one thing that I will say is that video that leaked with the Angry Victorians Party, where he was bragging and very egotistical, and I had some people say to me, oh, there's no way this is real, like you would never sort of say all that stuff. I'm like, you should Glenn. See him with a bottle of wine in him. I'm like, I have heard every single thing that he just said and more. Like, I'm telling you right now, that is his personality.
Joanne, please ask your question.
Okay. This is for Luke. What does Luke make of the Victorian voting system, the ability of individuals behind the scenes, people like Glenn Drury, to play such a pivotal and impactful role?
Thank you, Joanne.
Look, when the Upper House reforms were introduced, there was an extensive debate about whether there should be a particular primary level you need to get to before just preferences would be distributed, and accordingly could start collecting. That was a live debate at the time. I tend to think that realistically it probably would have made sense to have a minimum of maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the percent that people would feel comfortable with, and obviously as a government at the time someone needed to make a decision, and there isn't a sort of a base before you actually receive preferences. I tend to think there's probably a need to look at that in the longer term. So that's just the upper house. The lower house, is, to my way, is as straightforward as it can be, but the upper house is probably where the capacity to run tickets, and I'll be blunt, I know people who specialise in them, and I've got one guy who can literally take 10 votes off the City of Melbourne or 100 votes off the City of Melbourne and tell you who'll get up, where they'll get up and what flow they'll get up and what time, literally through understanding the tickets and being a statistician, but because he can see the connections between the different tickets quicker than anybody else. And he's done that in front of me, and I've sort of sat there going, oh God, but he's not necessarily a Glenn Drury, he just has a keen interest in what's going on and wants to know quicker than anyone else. But I do think there's probably a need to look at that.
Luke, why would that be looked at when the incentive for the majors, especially Labor, is to continue with the GVT system which they're benefiting from?
That's on a presumption the majors want a whole lot of variation in the upper house. I'll be blunt, the majors would love to have just the majors in the upper house. They're grumpy old bastards. They want it all to themselves. Yeah. So, you know what I mean? And I'm being a bit silly there when I'm saying that, but in many ways, we don't, Labor Party doesn't, for me, I don't want the Greens in the upper house.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so, surprise, surprise. So, I want it all Labor. Anyway, I'll shut up.
I'll comment on this in a way that, you might agree with me, but maybe won't be the words that you would choose. So the Libs want the current GVT system gone as it stands. Now, Labor, from my understanding, would like for it to be gone. However, the process of simply removing it on the basis of the way that our system currently works would essentially just hand a landslide to the Greens, which nobody wants. Labor doesn't want, Liberal doesn't want.
Millennials want it, I think.
We'll see. Well, the Greens are about to rip themselves in half as a party this year. So
Why?
Let's just say their internal issues. They're trying to turn their flag from green into pink and blue. But anyway, the point that I was going to make is...
well said. Yes.
They've got a lot of internal problems right now. So the point that I was trying to make is that, so in terms of the ability for individuals behind the scenes, one of the things with Drury, he is a gun for hire, and he is the kind of gun that the parties already have. So you only know Drury because he works with the smaller parties and charges them a certain fee. I can tell you right now, the people that do it for the majors earn a small fortune. And people who have that capability will continue to earn a small fortune for doing so, and you will never know their names.
Well, how much? 50 grand for Glenn, right? How much do you pay your guy, Luke?
Is he allowed to say that?
To be honest, it'll be an assistant secretary or secretary.
Oh, they're already involved.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, if they're well skilled, they will do that all themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And a lot of them are, should have been actuaries.
So it's a lot of it is statistical based and skill based, but the current GVT system, when it comes to the current system, the ability to manipulate it comes from the system itself, is my personal opinion, because just because it's Drury, if you get rid of Drury out of the equation, someone else can still do it, is the way that I would put that. And one of the things that's been holding back reform is both Labor and Liberal do want as much of the upper house themselves as they can get, but they also don't want the Greens to start coming in a landslide. And if you simply, the way that our system is, unfortunately in Victoria, if you just remove the GVT straight away, you will get a Greens landslide. You would actually need to engage in significant overhaul, structural reform of how our voting system works in order to get like a system like New South Wales or WA to enable us to still have a reasonable crossbench that is not just Greens.
Let's zoom out a little bit so we don't get our heads exploded by all this political stuff. I'm following like half of what they're saying, or 3/4. I'm not following it all. But a question from Owen. Owen, get ready to ask your question. But to zooming out, this is probably helpful to hear from you, Ken, because you talk on the macro. So have a listen to this question from Owen.
The question I've got is, we've been talking at a fairly somewhat superficial level about what's currently going on, but how do we create deep political change in the country going forward and create a wiser population that brings forth better politicians and a more educated populace who votes and understands how they vote?
Yes, because at the moment, everything we've been talking about, the mechanics and the incentives, kind of don't lead to this place that Owen's asking about, Ken.
I think we tend to forget that we are victims of our own histories and that we keep repeating ourselves, and there's nothing unusual about this time that we're going through with disparate all over the place. The political divide of the left-right thing of the Cold War period is a very unusual period when you take the broad sweep of history of politics, and Luke's going at the side there. So my understanding is that before the Menzies-Bolte era, that the Conservative, if you want to call them that, the parties were in a state of chaos, just like now. And then something came out of it and so forth. I always come back to, we humans behave in particular ways. The politics that we're talking about today is no different from the politics at your local football club or your bowling club, or my parents were both deceased, but we're in the local bowling club, and oh my God, the politics there. So, I decided many years ago that I'd be a terrible politician, and so I stood for pre-selection a few times, but realised I didn't have the personality for it. And I won't tell you what I think that personality is, because I'd be insulting.
You do it later on.
Yeah, but ultimately we've got no choice, but as people, to decide where are we going. Now, people talk about the chaos in the US, but I think the US system is just stunningly good. Everyone bitches about everyone else. Everyone fights, but I've read the biographies of about 10 US presidents, and George Washington was tearing his hair out as a president. He was going through the same frustration, but I'll tell you what, when you get good democracy, like you do in the United States, when it comes together on an issue, it is just awesomely powerful, just absolutely awesomely powerful. And one of the what we have to do is be really looking and saying, well, what are we wanting to achieve? And at the moment, we're certainly in a period where we don't know what we want to achieve on sort of this side of politics. I've got my thesis at the moment is that the left, the Marxists, the Socialists, and I've written a series of articles on this called The Great Australian Socialist Experiment, which I believe that we're going through at the moment. Dan, Albanese's from the left, Chalmers has painted out a picture of a new capitalism, and they are in the process of implementing a vision of our society, which is a socialist vision. And I'm not saying that as a Reds under the bed thing. I'm saying this is a serious view of what they say our society should be about, and that's flummoxed the other side. Their vision's quite clear, and the other side doesn't know what we're going. So to me, it's about getting that vision, knowing where it's at. I certainly have a vision of where it should go, and I don't like where we're currently going, but that's beside the point. But you have to have the vision, and then you have to argue it and argue it and argue it and argue it. I've got a quick aside on all of this. While I was at Marxism conference, there was a full session on... so those of you who don't know, I attended the Marxism conference 2023 at Melbourne University for 3 days during Easter. 1,300 people attended. It was a fascinating conference to attend. But one of the sessions was by the Victorian Socialist Party talking about the state election. One of the comments that came out as an aside, and I did a double take on this, it was just in the sort of commentary that was happening, the free flow commentary. Comment came up about the Marijuana Party, who have now got 2 members in the upper house. Two. And are intrinsically involved in the holding of the balance of power in the upper house. And the comment that came in discussions from the Marxists was, we got 2 of our people up. That's what I did. I don't know if there's any truth to that. But
Can you explain, once again, I'm following 60%. What does that mean if the legalised cannabis people are on the Marxist side? I want to keep you guys under control. I need a mic.
Sorry, I was just going to say, so there's 2 up at the moment. Fiona Patton is their advisor, as a lot of people kind of know, but just there. Very interested that that's the Marxist view, given some of the speeches that they've made, is the way that I would put that.
But wait. You just dropped a bombshell and they all said, ooh, and I'm the only one in the room who doesn't understand what you're talking about. Why does it matter if the 2 legalised cannabis people are Marxist?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They've been elected, but I just found it. They were running as the marijuana party. They get up, but then you get this comment that I just went, oh, because at the moment, the little exploration that I'm going through after the state election and the discussion on the election night and so forth, and seeing the Marxist, 50,000 people in Victoria voted for a party called the Socialist Party of Victoria. They voted consciously. This was not voting for something they didn't know about. And what I'm saying is I'm seeing a trend line here, a very substantial trend line. And if it's true that the Marxists got their 2 people up through the jury system or whatever they've did, that's a substantial, interesting bit of a jigsaw puzzle.
So the future of Australian politics is potentially Marxist for a season, or more Marxist for a season?
Well, certainly socialist left.
Yeah.
And again, that's not a Reds under the bed sort of gets scary. This is homespun. This is not something coming out of Russia. This is not something coming out of China. This is people who are very serious about the view of our society and where we go, and it's a socialist view, and it's embedded in Marxism and Leninism and so on and so forth. So get to understand it. What are they talking about? It's quite different to the view I have about a free market society. You're always drawing, any of these things is always about where do you tie the knot on a long piece of string. There's never absolutes. But here's the trend line that I'm seeing, and for quite conservative side of politics, for want of a better word, to fail to understand what's happening with your opposition, to seriously understand, is to mean that you're going to be defeated. No different from running a business. If you've got a business in a marketplace and you're getting pummeled by your competitors and you don't know what they're doing and you haven't analysed your competitors, you're going to go out of business. And that's exactly the situation that we've got at the moment. We don't know where they're going and not analysing the other side and not having goes at them and playing the parliamentary game. And so the parliamentary game is a consequence of understanding the other side.
The 2 things that I would add very quickly is there was a general accepted consensus that when legalised cannabis got up that they would be sort of the progressive bloc with the Greens and that sort of thing. So perhaps that's where a lot of the assumptions come from. And so far their voting patterns are relatively progressive, but not perhaps to the exact extent of the Greens. There's a lot of patterns influence. And as far as jury is concerned, I will just put on here, I'm fairly certain that Craig Ellis was the one who did their preference negotiations, who's one of the key people behind the party, and that there was actually more of a progressive voting bloc with the Greens, Legalise, and a couple of other parties, and that's how they basically got up. They had their own little progressive voting bloc, basically in competition or next to jury's little voting bloc process.
Let's go to Catherine's question, if you can join us, please, Catherine, on this business question. So considering where we're going in this socialist experiment for a season. Thank you, Catherine.
Sorry, I've become the family spokesman, apparently.
Oh, sorry. What's your name?
I'm Jo, but
You're
I'm proud to
Jo.
say I'm also Sarah and Catherine.
And you're Sarah and Catherine. Thank you, Jo.
So this question is for Ken. Ken, do you have any thoughts on the large number of small businesses that disappeared during COVID, and if our current state is incentivising their return?
Oh, thank you, Jo.
I think it's pretty easy. Obviously, once the damage is done and you're in the poo financially as a small business, you don't recover. If you've got 2 or 3 years, if you've got a recession, if you have 3 months of bad economic trading, and that goes for 6 months, you really don't recover from that. To go out to 2 years, you'd never recover from that, ever. It permanently throws you a thing. Are there policies? Most of the time in the political sphere, when they start talking of small business, oh, look, what incentives have we got for small business? And most of the time the discussion is, oh, look, we've thrown some subsidies here and we've got a grant here and all. And that goes to about 0.01% of people who can be bothered to apply. And then if you do apply, the application process is absurd, and then the reporting process is even worse, right? So the things that are really impacting small business at the moment, and will continue to do so a lot more, clearly there is so a number of factors that I see. Obviously inflation's huge. Second one, can't get labour at all, which is part of the inflation cycle. Next thing that's coming along in Victoria, of course, is we're going to see a huge increase in the premiums on workers' compensation. Through the roof. This government has completely lost control of the workers' compensation system. The blowout in mental health issues that are blamed on the employer, even if that has occurred in their private life, and the employer, this is a dysfunctional system, and what's going to happen is a huge increase in the costs. The effective process of destruction of the private sector rental market. So the vast bulk, 70 or 80% of rental accommodation is owned by people in their own right, one person, most a tradie or someone who will own one house. The rental rules now are such that it's highly marginal, not just on the interest rates, but highly marginal as to whether or not it's a going concern to be able to own a property that you can rent out and cover your costs and make a profit out of the whole thing. So you've got that happening. So we tend to forget that a big part of the small business market is mum and dads who own a house that they rent out. It's a big, big thing. I think most of the grants and all the rest that they are driven by public relations. That they are politics through ministerial press release, and relief through ministerial press release. The vast number of there's in Australia there's 1.5 million sole trader independent contractors. There's about 800,000 who employ other people. And so you're thinking of all of your hairdressers who work on their own, all the IT consultants, all that sort of stuff, all of the personal trainers, etc. Those people have been decimated. They never recover their incomes from that. An interesting thing that's coming along, keep a watch out for in Victoria, the class action that's being conducted in Victoria. They're going to succeed, I believe. The class action is for the damage done to small business during the lockdowns, and the firm that's conducting this is a global class action litigant firm, and they have in excess of 1,000 lawyers. I have dealt in the past on some issues. I get involved in some very strange stuff. Dealt with litigation fund managers. And I can tell you, they will not go ahead with the case unless they believe they've got about a 90% chance of success. They will not fund it.
Did they get litigation funding?
Of course they've got litigation funding. Of course they have.
No wonder you think they're going to.
It'll be organised overseas. Right? And they look for a return on their investment of 4 or 5 times. And so this particular law firm has just won a series of appeal cases in the Supreme Court in Victoria, where the government has been trying to block it. And my advice of the lawyers who've been looking at this tells me that this is going to succeed. And if it were to fully go to trial and fully succeed, it would bankrupt the state. So there will be a deal done at some stage in the hundreds and hundreds, if not reaching into the billions of dollars. So that ostensibly is going to go to small businesses who have been part of the action. But of course, the people who get the money are the lawyers. Yeah. And they get the lion's shares. We all know that. But keep a look out for that.
If someone wants a really abbreviated version, a bunch of small businesses suing the government over the COVID lockdowns because they did the wrong thing by small business. a funder, professional funder, looked at the case and went, yep, there's such a high chance of success, we will fund you. And that's one of the reasons why Ken thinks they will almost certainly win, which is going to cost us even more money, which is not good for the state. But when you start talking about that question that happened before about accountability, that's a very brutal and very unforgettable method of accountability if it ends up being one of the biggest settlements in the state's history.
Yeah, so I was looking at the accountability action through the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The court ruled that we're out of time and used a technicality to avoid applying the law. And so, but the substance of our case still remains, is that because it hasn't been ruled on. So the substance of the case remains there. So we made an attempt to get accountability through the law on that issue. And but this case is different because they're not relying on the OHS Act. It's straight out the lockdowns, so it doesn't relate to the deaths. And out of the lockdowns, it's straight out. Lockdowns shouldn't have occurred. This is the damage that was done to businesses. Here's the bill. So just the full bench of the Supreme Court this week ruled in favour of going ahead with the case.
Exciting times. So I guess if people want to follow that, they need to get on your mailing list. Are you the one that talks about that?
I probably need to.
Yeah, selfemployedaustralia.com.au. Let's go to a question from Anthony. We're going to get on to our favourite topic now, vaccines, but more specifically about accountability. And I guess this is a good opportunity to ask about, he's about to roast Luke and Labor, but to be fair, Liberals did it in New South Wales, Boris Johnson did it,
Federal
in the
Liberals
UK,
as well.
Federal Liberals, ScoMo, the most slimy con man I've ever seen. So, have I set your question up well?
Oh, look, to be honest, I'm not going to direct it solely at Luke. I don't think that's fair. So I'd like to get the entire panel's take on it. But I have family members who now have heart conditions as a result of the vaccine. This is something that not only medical professionals widely now acknowledge, but also our own federal government through the National COVID Vaccine Injury Scheme claim. I'd like to know how the Labor Party reconciles its position regarding the effects of the vaccine in light of the Premier's divisive victory speech.
So, in reference to that victory speech, I haven't had a chance to talk to you about that, Luke. What was the deal? He gets up. Most of us, when I say us, most of the state is vaccinated, right? He gets up in the middle of his victory speech, and good on him, he won, and he won resoundingly. Fine. And he goes, you know what, everyone, vaccines work. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? It's just a complete non sequitur. What is he going on about?
Oh, look, I was on 3AW till 11 o'clock, so we were on radio. We didn't necessarily have to be, so I wouldn't have seen that. But in terms of the vaccines, I was the aged, so I've got a prism. I looked at it from the point of view, I was aged care and disability minister. So I had two incredibly vulnerable parts of the community. Did I support the vaccination of the workforce and the aged care and disability? Yes, definitely. Would I have done so again? Yes, definitely. Because, yes, and I'm not, there are side effects, and for some people that is terrible, yes. What's that, sir?
So what about the more broad, I think the responsibility question Anthony's asking about, given you and others in your party have made a call that you need to do this, especially in your portfolio, but the reality is that we know now there are side effects. So isn't there also responsibility that even if you only caused a few deaths or a few issues...
That's why you use the TGA and others, and then you have those schemes and along the way as well. You've got to have both.
I think it is worth noting that none of these politicians could have made any of these decisions at all. They have no ability to approve medications. That was not them. When it comes to recommending the application, again, of that is not in their control.
They mandated it.
No, I know that. I'll get to that point. In terms of regarding the Premier's victory speech, I mean, I would go back to if you want someone's Achilles heel, he doesn't like being wrong, and he certainly doesn't like being made fun of. And when you started to get that serious pushback from it, I mean, things like being against the mandates, the CFMEU protests, when it came to pushing back against the bill, those are not the sort of things that he would enjoy. In terms of reconciling their position, I feel like it's worth mentioning in this context that a lot of the people that would have made these decisions got a brief that said, oh, well, we should do this. And unless someone was presenting them with an alternative option about why, what is there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but you guys got briefs going, yeah, this is what we recommend on the basis of what other countries have done. This is pretty much where we're going to go. Your area in particular, it is worth mentioning that legally, the areas that would have always have had no legal recourse whatsoever for the vaccine mandates are industries where there are already vaccines mandated for employment. And that includes aged care, disability and healthcare. So there are actually vaccine requirements to work there irrespective. Now, I know that this is different, but from an approval perspective, it came from the TGA. From a general worker perspective, I mean, of all the industries to have you here is that one. There is, I think, quite a more resounding consensus now that where there is risk, there should be choice. And it was the thing that grates for most people. There was a minimisation to borderline complete dismissal of the risks. And as someone who worked very extensively behind the scenes, speaking to pharmacists, doctors, nurses, individuals, speaking to people in government, speaking to people in the media, I will say unilaterally, there was definitely an overall suppression of discussion in relation to the risk because there was a decision almost agreed upon, and this is not just in Australia, but generally going, well, we have blown this up to be such a big risk. I mean, you had people turning up to emergency rooms, freaking out at medical staff going, oh my God, I've tested positive. And the staff were like, okay. Like, so? They're like, do you feel sick? They're like, no. They're like, then why are you here? But there was so much fear perpetuated. And this is a lot of what came around the lockdowns. When you hype that fear, particularly from a government perspective, one of the reasons they went as hard as they did from a policy perspective is they had to be seen to be doing something. They couldn't just tell you. That a lot of it was visible or physical changes that enabled you to feel like they were doing something. And I'm open to both of the feedback.
Luke, has your perception of the risk, you're at the front line of this, have you been surprised by the developments that we've seen where it's not as safe as we were told, it's not as effective as we were told?
I'm not surprised because there are adverse consequences to vaccines. You know, that's nothing new, but the potential in terms of, it's always a balance in terms of individual rights versus community protection. And that's the way I looked at it, to be blunt, in terms of aged care and disability. And, you know, for argument's sake, we don't allow pedophiles to do whatever they want to do. You know, it is always, I'm just talking...
Luke, that was not the thing.
No,
all right,
no. In terms of, we have limitations in terms of sexual behaviour in the community deliberately because we live in a community because we expect certain behaviour.
Right.
There is always a balance in terms of the way you drive on the road. We have restrictions on that versus the way you don't. So it's always a balance.
So you could not have picked a worse example. Of something where you're trying to, I mean, if your first response when you're talking about mandates is pedophiles, that's a problem. But like, it was just a very poor choice in relation to comparisons of restricting behaviour. My question to you is this. When you talk about the weighing of the community benefits, were you told when you were making the decision at the time, so irrespective of what you know now, but when you made the decision at the time in relation to mandating it in aged care and disabilities, were you told that the vaccine would stop transmission?
Hang on, I'm going to butt in. Because these things, community decisions that are made, governments will always stuff up. End of story. And when we stuff up, there has to be adequate compensation. Right? And that really is the issue now in the period of the COVID, of all the panic and all the stuff that went on. Excuse me, I'm a pro-vaxxer, but oh my God, I'm against mandated vaccinations. I think it's just appalling, right, that we should have gone to that extent. It's appalling that we closed the borders, etc., etc. You know, destruction of the democracy and so on and so forth. But we send people off to war, and we say it's for the good of the nation, and when they come back injured, we treat them like dirt. there is not adequate proper compensation for the harm that we society have allowed to have been done to them because they were going there for the good of society. And so what we wind up doing is saying, oh, well, the individual can wear it. So to the question from yourself about the family with the heart conditions, the thing that I find disturbing at the moment is that Greg Hunt said we'll set up this compensation scheme for people who will have who may have adverse reactions. And I've got to say, I haven't read a great deal about what's going on in the area, but it seems to me that the normal process is now following, where people who have had adverse reactions and who are suffering are not getting adequate compensation, are not getting adequate medical backup, etc., etc., etc. So again, what we're doing is saying, oh, well, you'll wear as an individual the problem, but it was all done for the good of society. I'm sorry, not good enough. Right? So in the middle of having to make decisions in an unknown situation, which is what Luke's was in the situation was, and there's a whole series of reasons, the overreaction in Victoria through the roof, beside the point. But now we live with today, and there has to be adequate backup support for the people who are suffering because what was promised was not what occurred. And we're not doing it properly, is my understanding.
Are you? I'm just curious if you were able to answer my question before. When you were
What was your question?
When you were making the decision in relation to the mandates, predominantly in your area with aged care and disabilities, I'm just curious about this and yes or no answer. Were you told at the time, so none of the later information, were you told that it would stop transmission predominantly?
We were all told that, weren't we?
Can you? Sorry. Sorry.
Providing protection.
So, but what do you mean protection?
Well, that if you got COVID, if you had the vaccine, it would have a less adverse impact upon the outcome.
So how does that protect community safety? It just protects the individual.
Well, it's if everybody's vaccinated, or most people are vaccinated, it stops the adverse impacts of people having to turn up to the emergency departments and things like that.
No, definitely. But what does that have to do with their employment in aged care then? You were talking about, you made the governments made the decisions they did about protecting the community. That's still an individual choice. I mean, if you're a chronic smoker, you get treatment at hospitals. If you are a drunk driver, they will save your life. Like, we don't judge the decision of others in our healthcare, nor should we ever. My question to you is, in the beginning, very, very, very beginning, and I'm asking this because you guys got up on television and said it, and I know because I watched every single one of your press conferences and I live tweeted them. Were you told that it would reduce transmission? Like, that was my question about, was that told to you from whether the TGA, someone else? Was that what you were led to believe? So if you mandated it, it would minimise the cases inside aged care and disability?
I don't remember exactly at the time what I was told, because we were running around at 100 miles an hour. To be blunt, I know it's very easy for people to go back and say, were you told this, were you told that? To be blunt, you're in the middle of a potential pandemic. You've got no idea how the pandemic's going to run out, and you've got to make decisions quickly in terms of aged care and disabilities. That was my sole focus. Yeah. And and that was really my greatest concern, was getting vaccinations into people who've got disabilities and aged care to minimise the impact. That's the way I saw it. So if you're asking me what my thoughts after all the briefings and so forth, that's the way I looked at it.
I have one question.
You've got to admit that the Swedish health minister, chief health officer,
yep,
who set the world standard for probably what should have been done.
Yeah.
He very early in the piece said, we stuffed up with aged care.
Yes, he did.
Right? So
well,
I think you've got to keep that in context.
Well, in aged care, one of the reasons they believe they stuffed up was in relation to their infection control procedures, not necessarily just vaccination. Yeah. That was actually prior or immediately before the widespread vaccination, because I was following Sweden very closely. So, but they do admit that they did that, and that if they had managed infection control, which I don't disagree with. I mean, infection control with an infectious disease seems relatively straightforward. I do have a question, and I understand that this is years ago now, but I'm just really curious. In early 2020, the state government and cabinet, when you sort of formed crisis cabinet and did that sort of restructure internally with Makakos, there was a decision to redo our pandemic plan in 2020, and then that got walked away from. Was there a particular reason why? I'm just curious if you can answer any of it.
I'm one of the few people, it's probably the only person here who's read all 556 pages of the Coate report.
I do not doubt that at all.
You challenge? You have?
Oh no, I said I don't doubt that at all.
And she describes in forensic detail, there's a whole chapter called Minute by Minute, and she describes literally decision-making processes that were occurring minute by minute. She names people, she names exactly what happened. It's very, very detailed. And what you see is a government in complete meltdown, chaos, chooks with their heads chopped off, and trying to work their way out of a situation of managerial incompetence of the most gobsmacking order. And to your point, they had been preparing a pandemic plan. In 2019, there was a UN conference where they were solidifying the plans for the pandemic before they knew a pandemic was coming. I've written all of this up in...
Can I just...
And to your point, the minute the pandemic occurred, they dumped all those plans. Like, it was just... I look at this whole thing from the perspective of managerial incompetence of an order that was just gobsmacking.
You're talking about
not
your
just
friend
here.
Like, you keep on dishing it out to Labor, managerial incompetence, chooks without a head, and he was there.
Yeah, but it was happening with Morrison was the same. They were all...
I know, but...
It was a chook exercise rather than anything else.
Isn't this hard to heal? You were part of the crisis cabinet, right?
No. Well, I think most of the cabinet, just from memory, I think, look, the problem was there was multiple meetings in different forums, in different subcommittees.
There was a restructure in response, so for those who aren't aware, in response to the emergency, there was a minor internal restructure administratively that did not go well either.
But my responsibility was directly for aged care and disabilities. I wasn't overall responsible for all the other stuff, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But
so for me, my focus was on narrow areas.
Yeah, is what Ken describing accurate in the feel of the party at the time?
I can't give you an honest answer because pandemic planning overall, public health, was not my responsibility.
Okay.
So, and it's not, what I'm saying is, I'm not trying to flick it off.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that would have been Jenny's and others who would have been responsible for that. And I literally had, sort of the narrow bits underneath that.
Yeah.
And for me, it was, more straightforward in that sense.
Okay.
Ken can probably confirm this. In the Coate report, it does outline the emergency mini side cabinet they gave COVID specific roles to, and you did not have one of those roles in that.
I don't.
There was the COVID response for community. There was COVID response for health. There was a little miniature sort of almost cabinet committee that was formed for the response. I believe that came out in the codes.
Probably Jenny would have had those, to be fair. And look, that could be a lie, so I hope I'm not lying, but it probably would have been Jenny because I was under... Jenny was the lead minister, then there was myself and Martin Foley, and then myself. So there was three of us, but
the other thing I will say, because this drives me tiny bit bananas, Ken is right about the meeting with planning and pandemic and everything else, but infectious disease planning and pandemic planning is something very normal conceptually in the infectious disease community. It's not a new concept that the scientific community would consistently be working to improve response times and doing things like that. I mean, you get a lot of infectious disease problems predominantly in third world countries, and that is often where it's probably more applicable. But I get a bit concerned sometimes when I see some of the comments online going, there was, infectious disease and pandemic planning. I'm going, if you talk to someone who works in infectious diseases, which I made a genuine effort to do over the last couple of years, they will tell you that it's their industry, it's their career. It's like any other industry where you have planning and improvements and things like that. So that's my only
All right, in our last 20 minutes, just get ready if anyone has questions without notice, and we'll go to those and you can ask them. But can I ask you, Luke, looking back in hindsight, what do you think that our governments should have done differently? Specifically Labor government that you're a part of, but you can comment more broadly. But what should we have done different in our pandemic response? What are the regrets? Because surely we didn't do it all right. Surely we stuffed things up, moving at the speed of science.
I guess in some ways trying to bring everyone along. And you'll never get that. So, and look, I sat down with a lot of people in my office who were against the vaccination. So I sat down with people, I engaged with them. I didn't necessarily agree with them, obviously, but I think I would have sat down with 15, 20 people from my local community over the time. Some of them were related to just didn't like vaccination full stop. Some of them didn't like the particular methodology, the way the vaccination was developed and so forth. So, look, in many ways, you know, it's a pity the warnings coming out of China, we weren't more on the front foot. But to be blunt, that wasn't just state or federal. You know, in many ways, a lot of the countries didn't really act quickly, and that would be the one thing I would suggest.
So what do you mean specifically we needed to act quicker on what?
Well, to really start planning for a pandemic. You know,
Better
how do you
planning.
deal with it?
But we were quick to do masks, we were quick to mandate, we were quick to close the borders, we were quick to lockdown.
No, we
had
weren't.
supply
March
issues on
2020.
masks, we had supply issues on all those things. There was shortages of all those things.
You think this would have given us a better result if we had more masks, quicker masks, quicker vaccines?
Possibly.
Serious?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay. Sorry?
There are 800 years worth of...
No.
Yeah. We've overshot. So just to be clear, what you think we could have done better is been more prepared, and also the earlier piece you started, bringing people together. What were you saying about that?
We'll be taking people on the journey and starting the journey earlier. In terms of engagement, discussion and so forth.
So it's less panicky?
Yes.
Do you have anything to say before I go to questions?
Not right now. There's a couple of things I'm thinking about saying that I'm like, do I want these on record? Yeah, probably not. Look, the one thing that I will say right now is I can tell you right now, the communication style by the Andrews government when the lockdown first happened about scaring the shit out of people. Sorry, Matt, I nearly did the whole thing without swearing. That was premeditated and that was intentional, and I know that because I've seen messages from one of the advisors. So that fear tactic, they knew it would work. They knew if they scared people, they would get that obedience faster. So when it comes to bringing people along, I think maybe that regret is there that you weren't able to have a softer approach, but their decision was then made, right, well, we need them to go along right now, and the fastest way to do that is fear, and then there was simply no deviation after that point. It just continued down that path, perhaps above and beyond even now, whether a lot of the Labor people are willing to say it or not, perhaps above and beyond what some of them even felt comfortable with in terms of the fear messaging.
Well, do we have any questions without notice? Please stand on the X and give us your, if you can, just your first name and your question. Who is it for?
I'm Bernadette.
Hi.
I think I need a little bit of background. I'm an unemployed nurse of a 42-year career and passion in nursing. I've worked in 20 health services probably, sometimes 2 and 3 at a time, in 5 states. I am double vaxxed. I'm an immunisation nurse. My first training was infectious diseases hospital in Melbourne in 1981. I can't work. I can't work as a telehealth nurse from home, never seeing anybody without 3 vaccinations. AHPRA wrote into the policy that we now have to abide by whatever vaccination they decide where to have to be able to work. So now the third, I think, has gone to booster, which they're advertising on the radio for everyone to get their booster. My question is about mandates. What the hell? Because everyone thinks they're gone. And there are tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of health professionals, professors, scientists, doctors, nurses, allied health, who are not working. We were in a crisis in health when we started. It's been a crisis of staff, my 42 years of nursing. I could just go on and on about all the things you've said. It's an untrialled vaccine. It's a brand new, it's not your protein base, it's mRNA, which gets into our DNA, RNA, and it's untrialled. The last people that should have anything untrialled are the highly vulnerable, aged, autoimmune deficient, any of those. It's a trial. And it should have been kept as a trial.
What, do you have a question?
My
Bernadette?
question is, what's going to happen with mandates, because health professionals can't work?
So, okay. I don't know how any of us can answer, but we'll try. But I find this interesting that some of us haven't been vaccinated at all. Some of us have been double vaxxed. Some of us have been 5 times vaxxed. It's not as simple as pro-vax, anti-vax.
Look, my response to this question generally, when people go, when is the health system going to lift the mandates? And my response is when they have no choice, when the system fully collapses. That's the genuine response.
That's what happened in the US.
Yeah, for sure. That's
enough stood up.
Are there enough stood up, which happened in some other countries? In the UK in particular, they had an extremely organised group of health professionals who went, we have a right, we are intelligent, we are medical professionals, we will choose what is best for us, and threatened to walk. I think they called it NHS 100,000, and there was something like 100,000 workers across health that threatened to walk, and they won.
And then they backed down for the whole system.
They backed down
10 or 15%.
They backed down for the whole system. You can go to the UK and work in health and not be vaccinated at all. And I mean, we brought the mandates in at the exact point that they also ripped off the concept of COVID zero, and I was like, done everything at the exact wrong time. You fired all the health workers just as you opened up. I mean, no wonder the system is in chaos. But in terms of when they lift it, it will be when things get even worse is the genuine response. And I think what will actually trigger that is not necessarily just the shortages at the moment where, people are dying and, you can't get a hospital bed and there's surgery wait lists and so on, because they've demonstrated that that's not necessarily a motivator as much. It will be when they try and get new recruits, and the triple and boosted uptake rate when it comes to under the age of 25 is basically non-existent. And so where are your staff going to come from? You can't keep... you couldn't recruit them from overseas, so they're not coming from there. Where is your future workforce coming from? You do not have one. And it will get to probably... There will be a lot of people willing to do it if they want a career in medicine. But if you were young and you had 2, for example, and they went, do you want to do this or do you want to do something else? You're like, why would I continue to go down that path? And I think that may be one of the trigger points.
Really, you're talking practical nonsense, because this is all about politics, So, stop being practical, will you?
I can't help myself then.
I also had knowledge of decision-making processes during the whole thing with private providers who were interfacing with the health department, who would have regular meetings would have weekly meetings at very high level. And as they were going into the pandemic and then coming out and trying to wind it back, the people in the health department, the very senior people, never made a decision in any single meeting. Never gave an instruction to the providers as to what was going to occur. Everything was fed back into Dan's office. There was then the political consideration of what's the politics of this and how will it play, and then decisions were made. Now, my view would be that that's still occurring. And until such time, and we talk about the brilliance of Dan, this is part of the brilliance of Dan. And the common sense and the practicality and the issues that you're talking about will not be resolved until Dan decides that the politics is there to resolve it.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why they stopped doing lockdowns or they lifted the masks or whatever. It was when it became unpopular. But again, this is also to do with, you look at other countries and things that happened, like, for example, I think it was Russia, that they tried to close the businesses or do something like that, and something like 60% of people went, we're not doing that. And they had to reverse it. And another one where, the shopkeepers rebelled and they refused to do it. I mean, it comes down to that. I think, a little bit as well, but they will stay on for as long as it is politically convenient to do so. If you were to have a campaign that was around let them work, where people who were affected by the shortages or staff who were willing to go back and you could start to get organised, that would probably be, if you want a political pushback idea, that would be it. But alternatively, it will be, again, a political motivator. It will come out in the media that, you know, there's catastrophic shortfalls in nursing students. Where is the workforce going to come from? We're facing dire shortages. And then, again, like that's when they'd act. But I would agree with Ken completely. It will be political.
Just a comment, in terms of aged care, I think we had 98% of the workforce pre-COVID, before COVID started, with flu vaccines and so forth without mandates. So that was pre.
It didn't work without because aged care they had put in place because the people had gone to court in aged care without a clue that the workplace could decide whether they had to be vaxxed or not.
And that would be federal as well as not just state. But I know I'm just saying in the ones we ran, we had 98% without a mandate happily having it there.
Well, I don't know that they were told that they would lose their job if they didn't, even though it wasn't mandated. They did mandate flu in health, aged care and in hospital for 2 months.
Later on, I'm talking pre-COVID, sorry.
Yeah, 2 months before COVID. Oh, sorry. No, because I think I'm going to get to it. 2 months, so 2 months before.
Oh, this was well before the 2 months. This was
Yes, I understand. It wasn't mandated though. The health services or aged care providers had the choice. The government, they were allowed to choose, and that had been going on for some time. So there were plenty of people that lost their jobs because they didn't agree to have it in their employment contract.
We swapped.
In aged care.
We swapped people into administration during that period.
This is previously.
I can't hear you, mate.
No, in terms of, no. We have 10% of the aged care beds in the state. We have 80% of aged care beds in regional Victoria. People who didn't want to be vaccinated were swapped into administration and so forth. In terms of the state, I'm not talking private, I'm talking state.
I know, I was working through the state through aged care as well. As an RN, I've worked in many specialities. So they actually, the workplace could say, and they would take it because they thought they were going to be unemployed because there's only so many administrations. A lot of these people, the AINs, don't have English as their first language or even probably the skills to do administration. There's, and there's already people in administration. So that's not actually a fair representation of what actually happened. And those that refused the flu prior to the mandating did leave. Well, some went to court to try.
That's the figures in terms of what we had were 98% without mandate, and that continued on after pre-COVID. I'm talking well before COVID, and then when COVID happened, we gave the opportunity to people to move into
I'm not doubting the 98%, but what's the percentage that did it to keep their job? And that's huge. That is actually huge.
Understood. I understand your point. I understand both your points, but I don't think we're going to solve that right now. So let's go to the... I think we've got time for one last question without notice.
How you doing? Thank you very much.
Two. Okay, we'll try and squeeze two in.
This will be a bit more light-hearted, right? But
Thank you, sir.
But as in, not as serious as this. People won't get as emotional. But it is really important for me for what I've got a 12-year-old daughter, right? And my biggest fear is cost of housing 20 years' time, all right? I've heard a few people talk about this on the panel in the previous sessions. We need to get a system that our children can afford housing. It is a classical liberal value that people should be able to buy property. If they're out of the market because it's too expensive, then all of the discussions about socialism and communism, it comes in. So how do we have a free market and make housing affordable?
First of all, we blame John Howard for screwing the whole thing, frankly.
No. I go back to... Look, to be blunt, we need to deal with the perverse tax incentives which encourage you to invest in housing above everything else.
John Howard?
No, before Howard. To be fair, it wasn't John Howard. It was well before that. But very few countries provide so many incentives to invest in one particular area of investment, housing, vis-a-vis business and everything else. And I tend to think until we can actually have a balance in terms of the incentives, in terms of what capital gains is or isn't applied, in terms of what negative giving negative gearing isn't applied, whether you'd want to quarantine and so forth. What I'm saying is we need to have the difficult discussion in that space, and we also have to have the difficult discussion in terms of supply. But, like in America, I think there's deductions for capital payments. Okay, that might be something we need to think of, but we need to look at the behaviour, because the tax is driving the behaviour partly, and we're getting the outcome we're seeking through the tax.
There's another
That's
problem here, though, Luke, though, is your party and the Liberal Party have to represent a whole bunch of people who own their homes. And when the housing market has a sniffle, they're all screaming at the two majors to fix it. And we end up with the boomers who own property wanting to protect the property market, and the millennials who want it to crash. Frankly, I want it to crash so I can buy in.
There's all of that. But how did we get there?
Howard, but yeah, go on.
Oh, well, no, I'm not. Mate, I'm always happy to have a dig at Liberals, but that, to be fair, this is the existing tax system that we've all set up over extensive periods of time, and we all agree as a community that's what we want. Well, that's the outcome.
I'm just saying your incentive to change it is not going to be there for the major parties, because you have to represent the boomers.
I've frequently suggested we should be changing it, but I'm not in federal parliament, because really most of them are federal.
Well, the Greens and the other smaller parties are picking up this millennial vote and so on.
Oh, yeah, but that's more in punishment.
Yeah, okay. All right. Hello, hi, sir.
Going well, thank you. I'm John.
Hey, John. Speak German.
It's a phrase that I learnt during COVID. Es ist für Ihre Sicherheit. It's for your safety. This is why we are doing these things. It's for your safety, for the safety of everyone.
Okay.
The justification of a certain socialist party some many years ago that changed the world. So yes, that and ich werde nicht nachkommen. I will not comply.
Wow. Didn't know they had word for that.
Yeah.
Right, go on.
Jawohl, mein Herr, hier ist mein Papier. Here are my papers when we're all getting stopped and checked for your papers.
No, that never happened, according to some of the ministers who... Who was the minister that said that never ever happened?
Pulford.
Jana Pulford.
Yala Pulford was deeply offended when someone insinuated there was a Papers, Please society.
I've shown my papers.
She got very
I remember
offended by
showing
that, which I thought was
papers.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Sorry.
And the Ring of Steel.
Ring of paper mache, I'm told it was.
Well, it
Actually.
depends. If it was raining, it suddenly disappeared. The cops didn't like it. What's your question?
Yeah, everyone went into the bus, yes. So my question for Luke, thank you, Luke, for, I think as somebody else mentioned, into the lion's den. How can you justify in our representative democracy the mandating of all Labor Party members voting the party line, the contravening of which will have a member expelled, even when voting the party line goes against the wishes and best interests of your constituents? And how does this not make the Labor Party a cult?
Well, Emily thinks it is a cult.
Look, I am...
Anyway.
This is that one time I decided to do a live after having a wine.
I put a clip out of Emily saying the Labor Party's an effing cult. All right,
There was that, and I think
that.
that was the Balls to the Wall Kennett episode as well.
Yeah, she's into Kennett. All right, so Luke, please.
Look, it's a bit like playing in a football team. I was very comfortable to vote the party line and vote with the party, and always have been. So for me, I want the team. You don't necessarily agree, like in Cabinet, you don't necessarily agree with every decision made, but you provide a united front. The public's well aware of the Labor Party demands discipline in terms of voting and things like that, so they continue voting. So I'm quite comfortable in that situation. Is it a cult? No, I don't think it's particularly a cult any more than, many members of Parliament might be voting a party line who could potentially on all sides of the House be against their interests of their community, supposedly. But that's very much a subjective assessment. So, and to be blunt, for me, I got more done being in government as a minister for my community, I think in many ways, especially to be fair during COVID, because I had a strong connection in terms of the community, in terms of the social needs, in terms of food and all that type of stuff. So, but I don't, look, that's the Liberal Party doesn't bind their people as strongly, but they certainly don't want them all running around with different policies saying all different things. So, they probably just won't expel them. That's the difference.
I think the question really comes back to the hardline stance that Labor takes compared to other parties, where it is very, very clear. You do exactly what you're told, and if you publicly deviate, you are gone. End of story. Now, the Liberal Party, all parties have party lines, and this is one of the difficulties when you join a party. Like, that's the point. You have to toe the party line to an extent.
Well, look, if you go to state conference of the ALP, there's more Donny-Brooks at state conference in the ALP, and internal division within the party, and there always is.
You've got
to have it.
Yeah, the colloquial expression is that you're the family. You can fight each other as much as you want. You do it with glee, knives and teeth. But when it comes to everything else from an external perspective, you are in line and in control, or you're out. And I think that that's where the cult perception comes from. It's you obey or you're gone. Whereas you get the Liberal Party and like, look, perhaps they're a little bit too loose. I mean, you've got your Bernie Finns and you've got your Deemings and you've got your examples about why not having that control over what your MPs feel as if they're able to say with abandon. But yeah, interesting to get your take.
No, I'm pretty comfortable. You know, I was comfortable voting the party line. So,
Did you have a follow-up to your question? Are you satisfied?
No, thank you. I appreciate your answer.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for doing...
Can we do the one here just down at the back?
Yeah, I was just saying thank you very much for just being here on that, Luke, because that's why I invited you, because you're honest and you face up to questions. I appreciate you did it with me and you're doing it here today. So we've got our last question today. I remember you at the Peter Boghossian event.
Yes, I enjoyed it a lot. I'm back for more. I'm going to just be a bit radical and be nice to Luke. So you said in response to the first question that you like to be a good local candidate before you even got pre-selection. Now I'm very new to this whole politics game. How long is that? And my actual question is, how do you make sure people remember you from like when you door knocked all the way up to election day?
they didn't. I'd just like to delude myself into thinking they did. But because I'd done it another 8-9 times over the next 20 years, guess what? Most of them would recognise me because I would turn up. I could tell you where every grumpy Liberal voter lives in my electorate because I'd knocked on their door so many times. I went back in 2018 with a couple of door knockers who were with me. I said, knock on that door, that guy will scream at you. They knocked on the door, screamed at them in 2 seconds. I said, he's still there, I could tell. But no, it's just, look, the honest truth is that door knocking is the best way. It is simple, it is uncomplicated, and to my way of thinking, look, when I came into the seat, it was, where was it? It was 46 our way, 54 the Liberal way. So, for years, culturally, it had been very comfortable with the Liberal Party, with Robert Dean. My way of dealing with that was to go and talk to people directly and not badger them with politics the whole time and actually just engage what their issues were. And that's the way I did it for 20 years. I did not go out with big banners. I'd go to do mobile offices every month. I'd do door knocking non-stop. But it wasn't about whacking them over the head with politics because, to be blunt, 80% of my community has no interest in politics. They want to get on with their life. They want dignity. They want employment. They want good health. They want education. They've got no interest in me coming and going, no. Liberals have buggered up this. I'm better, so you like me. Well, it doesn't work at the front door. You don't do it, at Christmas dinners and things like that. So, why would you do it in the privacy of someone's front door and start irritating the hell out of them? I'd just go there and say, can I help you? If they'd say no, I'd leave them alone. I wouldn't badger them.
So how does that then translate into votes? If you're not pushing...
Because you're always available. Okay. You're always there. Because you are... Okay, it's like Coca-Cola. You go to...
PR campaign.
Yeah, what's it?
It's a giant PR campaign.
That's what it is. And they go to the fridge...
Yeah.
And they have to choose between a collar. The only collar they know, the only collar they've seen come to the front door is Coca-Cola, so they go for Coca-Cola. It's about neutralising the perception that you don't give a stuff, you're not engaged, and you don't care. Now, I had people sit at the front door and swear, I've voted for you my whole life and I've always been a Liberal voter. And I'd think, okay, so you're voting for me, I'm supposedly a Liberal, but I've got a poster which says I'm Labor at election time, and you'll swear black and blue
Wow, that's how you win. Thank you so much for being here. The people watching online, look, this was going to be on YouTube, but thanks to Bernadette saying a few things, we won't be able to put it on YouTube. No, I'm just having a go. Better Than QandA, brought to you by the people in this room. We are existing because of locals, discernible.locals.com. All the links are below. And thank you to the amazing panel. Help me give a hand for Emily, Voice for Victoria. Always very good to have you here, Emily. Ken Phillips from Self-Political, one of the crowd favourites. Thank you for being here. Quite frankly, I am surprised because you and I we speak for hours on the phone just like we do in front of a camera, and I find it fascinating. But I'm surprised people are willing to sit down and listen to us speak on camera for 2 hours straight. Isn't it weird?
I think I told you the story before after the session I talked about the Marxist conference, and I had a lady ring me who was a founding member of the Marxists in Victoria, and has broken off with them, and she's now in the freedom movement, but still a Marxist. And I got out my whiskey and I sat down, and I went through 2 whiskies while we had a 2-hour telephone conversation about the meaning of life and Marxism and all that sort of stuff. So.
I think people are looking for depth, and you bring it. Thank you, Ken. And a round of applause for Luke Donnellan, former Minister. Special thanks to you. Many people on the Labor side of politics and Green side won't talk to me, but you always do. Thank you very much, Luke. And most of all, thank you to the people in the room. You have taken time to be here in the middle of Berlin on this lovely day. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, now, from the beginning.